For some reason, angels may be all over the pages of our Bible, but they are very rarely talked about inside modern churches. Personally, in my pursuit of studying the Bible, no teacher ever mentioned or spoke about the relevance of these very important biblical characters. Today, we're going to change that. In this exciting series, helping you rediscover biblical angels, we are going to see that the biblical authors saw the heavenly realm as much more populated than what we think of today. This series is going to trace angels from Genesis all the way to the book of Revelation. We will explore the true meaning of Elohim. We're going to see how the stars and planets were actual spiritual beings in the minds of biblical authors. We'll also focus on the angel of the Lord and the watchers that are represented in the book of Daniel and the book of Enoch. In this series, we will truly rediscover angels the way biblical authors intended for us to see them. Get ready to have your paradigm shattered and your mind blown as we rediscover the Bible on its own terms together. As always, let's start in Genesis. Stay tuned, my friends. The beginning is near.
This is humanity's high calling, to rule creation in the love and power of God.
Very cool.
But not everyone's happy. We're introduced to a spiritual being who doesn't want humans to rule, so he tricks them into thinking that they can get divine power on their own terms.
They're deceived, and they take the opportunity.
So they're banished from the Eden mountain, exiled to wander the earth and return to the dust.
This snake is bad news.
Yeah, and as you read on, you discover that he's part of a spiritual rebellion that follows the humans outside of Eden, and things get worse from here.
The humans still desire to rule, so they start a new project.
Yes, in the Bible, this is called Babylon. It's the anti-Eden, where human and spiritual rebels join together to elevate themselves back to their former glory. And so, with all that in mind, we can now appreciate the full cast of characters that we meet in the biblical story.
God, humans, and all of the spiritual beings.
Exactly.
Cherubim and Seraphim are words that most English Bible readers are going to be familiar with, as they're transliterated, they're not translated. So they appear in the English Bible sort of, for what they are. And we sort of don't stop to think about these two as job descriptions. Again, we're not tuned into the nuancing of vocabulary, which is really why I jump into it right away in the book. This is actually where we get the idea that angels have wings, because cherubim have wings and seraphim have wings, and they're all just angels anyway. In other words, we smash all the terms together, and that gives rise to this myth about angels having wings. So it becomes sort of more than a metaphor for us as moderns. This is just the way we think of them. We don't look at pictures of angels and think, that's just a metaphor for, they come from above. No, we actually do think of angels this way, and it works its way into pop culture in all sorts of movies and whatnot. So this is actually what it derives from. But cherubim and seraphim, again, these are bucket 3 terms. These are job descriptions. They are terms that are drawn from, respectively, cherubim comes from Akkadian, seraphim is actually Egyptian, and it refers to a throne guardian. Now, there will be those who say, well, seraph, that means to burn, so it's burning ones or luminous ones or something like that. Again, in the book, I go into the details of the scholarship on this, but it's actually a term both in Hebrew and in Egyptian. And in Hebrew, seraph is a serpent, is a snake. And you say, well, that's just kind of weird. Again, don't think of Genesis 3 because we're not in Genesis 3. We're in passages like Isaiah chapter 6. But in Egypt, the serpent, again, think of the Pharaoh's headdress. In Egyptian thought, the seraph, the seraph, again, depending on your pronunciation, is going to be a supernatural throne guardian. Again, this is just the way it's depicted. So the imagery, again, is consistent with a word like cherub. Cherubim, seraphim, they're really referring to the same sort of job. We protect sacred space. And you say, well, does God need protection? Is he fearful? No, that isn't the idea at all. The idea is that we're using this terminology to tell you that there are members of the heavenly host who actively try to keep God's presence from being defiled. I mean, we do this on earth as well in the Old Testament. Okay, there were rules about where you could walk and you couldn't in the tabernacle and the temple and sacred space on earth. The same idea is resident, also in the heavens. And so to communicate the idea that where God is has to be protected from people like you, like when the prophet is transported into the throne room of God, he has to be purified. He has to be made fit for sacred space. So that's their job. This is what they do. They protect God's presence from defilement, from anything lesser. So when we talk about words like cherubim and seraphim, again, we have to realize that what the writers are doing is they're using something common in their world that their audience will know visually, and they're using that as a metaphor to describe a function of something going on in the spiritual world. So it's very easy to read something like Ezekiel and, we've got cherubim with 4 heads and lots of eyes on their body and wings and literalize it. And you have a lot of people that think, well, when I get to heaven, I'm going to see one of those. Like there's an actual critter that maybe needs to visit the veterinarian, if you just to stay healthy. No, the point is not that there are actually critters like this somewhere. The point is that the biblical writers are using, again, the things of their experience. People who were in exile, for example, are going to be used to seeing royal imagery, royal iconography, statues, carvings of divine thrones or royal thrones that have the winged bull, the winged lion, and all this sort of stuff. They're going to be used to seeing that, and they know what it means. We're in the presence of royalty, or this denotes where the king sits. Okay, this is the king's space, it's not our space. You don't just run up to him and say hi. We still have a little bit of these sorts of trappings like in the UK, like with the Queen. You're not supposed to touch the Queen. You don't get near the Queen, and she's got people to protect her. In her case, it really is a legitimate issue. It could be in terms of protection, but it's also an issue of protocol. You don't touch the Queen. Even when someone shakes her hand, it's a controversy because you don't touch the Queen. Well, it's the same way in the ancient world. They had ways of telegraphing to people, this is space where you don't belong, and it's protected. Again, in the earthly world, you would have had soldiers accompanying with this. They would have been wearing certain things, but it's also communicated with these pictures of what the king's throne looks like. And again, the royal symbols of power and presence. Well, the biblical writers take this and they use it analogously for the heavenly world to describe that when you're in God's throne room, okay, that is a place that's protected from defilement, from invaders, from people who don't belong there. And even when they're summoned, like the prophet, they have to be purified and made acceptable to occupy that space. And so the imagery sort of accomplishes what the writer is trying to communicate. Now, what's interesting about the terminology is you get it in certain passages, like Ezekiel 28, where we have a reference to the anointed cherub, who covers, and so on and so forth. The language is kind of odd there, but that's important because that figure is connected with Eden and its rebellion. And so some scholars have theorized that the being from the heavenly host who decided that he wanted autonomy, wanted to call the shots, wanted to run the show and eliminate humanity and whatnot, was actually a being that had close proximity to God, again, protecting God's sacred space. And there is some sense to that, because if we understand Eden as being the place where God lives, it's God's house essentially, and where God lives, he also conducts business. It's where his entourage is and his, where they have the board meetings and all that sort of stuff. You would have a being that, again, Adam and Eve, since they live in God's house as well, Eden, that they may have been familiar with these spiritual beings and their role. And one of them steps up to Eve, plotting against her. So there is something to be said for recognizing that this terminology denotes a spiritual being that, yes, has a task, but also with that task had really close proximity to God.
Yeah.
That came up from this video was that we showed the serpent
Yeah.
connected to a character in the Bible, characters in the Bible called seraphim.
They're in the book of Isaiah.
They're in the book of Isaiah.
Yes.
The only time they appear called that.
Correct.
And what they seem to be
Yeah.
are what we elsewhere in Scripture would know of as the cherubim.
Correct.
These creatures,
Yeah.
animal-like wings,
Yeah.
flying around, protecting God's throne,
Yeah.
worshiping God.
Yeah.
Isaiah has this vision. He calls
Yeah.
them seraphim.
Yep.
And you pointed out that
Yeah.
seraphim
Yeah.
means snake.
It's the Hebrew word for snake.
It's the Hebrew word for snake.
Correct.
Now,
Right.
many people have checked into that and said, well, when I look up the word seraphim, yes, snake is a possible translation,
Yeah.
but also just the idea of the burning ones
Yeah.
is a translation.
Yeah.
So are we pushing it too far? Can it just actually mean a burning one and not necessarily a snake?
Yeah.
And are we trying to too neatly tie this idea of the serpent in the garden
Yep.
to a spiritual being?
So a lot of this is due to confusion about how the Hebrew language works.
Okay.
So maybe just facts on the ground. The Hebrew word seraphim,
Mhm.
it's a Hebrew plural noun. The im is a plural. So the noun is just saraf.
Okay.
Saraf. So the noun saraf appears 8 times in the Hebrew Bible. And never once does it refer to a burning creature or a creature on fire. It means snake every single one of those times.
In the Hebrew scriptures.
In the Hebrew Bible.
Every time.
Yes.
It means snake.
If you look up the word in the standard Hebrew Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, or in the classic Brown Driver Briggs Hebrew lexicon, these are dictionaries of ancient biblical Hebrew. You just look up the word saraf, and the first meaning is snake. And then they give you there's only 8 examples in the Hebrew Bible. It's in Numbers 21, the saraf that bite the Israelites, and then he makes a bronze saraf, Moses does, to go on a staff. Moses talks about the seraphim that bit the Israelites in the wilderness, that same story. In the book of Isaiah, he mentions these seraphim 3 times. One of them is in that vision Isaiah sees. And then in 2 other times, in Isaiah 14 and Isaiah 30, he talks about a flying seraph, a seraph with wings that flies. And it's in poetry, and he's describing a flying snake. He just says it straight up.
Very clear.
A flying snake, yeah. So the flying snakes occur 3 times in the book of Isaiah. But for some reason, our modern translations translate it snake in Isaiah chapters 14 and 30, but they just don't translate it in Isaiah 6.
As snake.
They just spell it with English letters, seraphim. But it is the standard Hebrew word for snake.
Where does this idea of the burning ones come
Yes.
up? Why is that in some dictionaries?
So the Hebrew words are built off of a 3-letter root.
Okay.
The 3-letter root, sin, resh, pe, saraf, appears in a verb, and saraf, and the verb means to set on fire, to burn. There also is a noun built off of that root, serefa, that means like burning.
A burnt thing.
A burnt thing, that's right. So, but the way Hebrew nouns work is they'll build different words off of a 3-letter root. So the reason why these snakes are called seraphim is because they bite and they're poisonous. And I've never gotten a snake bite before. Have you ever been? You've hunted rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
I never have.
Yeah, I've never been bit though.
But it's the sensation of burning, apparently,
Sure.
when you get bit.
Yeah.
So a burning snake
I-
makes perfect sense. It's a venomous snake. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So those ideas are connected.
Correct. Yeah.
So seraph
Yeah.
means snake.
Yep.
But as a verb,
Yep,
it
it can
means
mean
burning.
To burn. Yeah.
To burn.
Correct.
And then you said there's a time where it's also used as a noun to mean.
There's a different noun that's
But it's a
not
different-
seraphim.
Oh, it's not seraphim.
Serifa, that can refer to burning as a noun.
Okay.
But
But that still begs the question then, why is it that you open a dictionary and seraphim,
Yeah.
sometimes it says the burning ones? Is that just
Yeah.
tradition?
There's no dictionary of biblical Hebrew that I know of that has burning one as a meaning for
there isn't.
the entry of seraphim.
Oh,
No.
okay. You
no.
look it up in a Hebrew dictionary and it's going to say snake.
Yeah, correct.
Oh.
Some people use a older tool from the 19th century called Strong's Concordance. And I did look that up, and actually here, real quick. Strong's. And the first meaning they give is burning, and then they say figuratively of a poisonous serpent. So even though they say burning at first, they immediately qualify to talk figuratively about burning serpent. So I'm not sure where this idea of the seraphim as burning ones came from, but it's not based on any of the evidence in biblical Hebrew. So it means snake.
So what Isaiah saw
What Isaiah saw are flying snakes.
are flying snakes.
Yeah.
Which wouldn't have been an uncommon symbol for him to see.
No, it's actually a very common symbol. Ancient Egypt depicted flying snakes as an icon of creatures surrounding their gods. There have been found ancient Israelite clay seals with the names of kings on them and stuff, and they show snakes with wings. There's a snake with 2 wings and a snake with 4 wings. So this was an Israelite icon to talk about the cherubim that surround the divine throne. So what's important in the book of Isaiah especially is that when he uses the noun seraph, one of those other times in Isaiah 14, he's talking actually about the ruler of Babylon, who earlier in the same chapter was described as the one who tried to ascend to God's throne and make his throne above God's throne.
Yeah. So this is a connected image.
Yeah, so Isaiah 14 is actually tracking and linking into the Genesis 3 story and trying to help us see that that snake was a heavenly being that disguised itself to deceive the humans and was actually trying to make a power grab and trying to get the humans to do the same.
Okay, first, the cherubim. These are chubby little babies with wings, right?
No, you got to get that image out of your head. Cherubim, or in Hebrew, cherubim, they're way more fascinating. They're described as hybrid creatures, a collage of different animals, and every time they do appear, they look a little bit different.
That's intense.
Yeah, they're supposed to be intimidating. They stand guard at the boundary between heaven and earth. If you see them, you know you're entering the presence of the one who is above all and truly other.
The first time cherubim show up in the story of the Bible, they're standing outside of the Garden of Eden.
Right, the garden is God's temple residence, and so he places these spiritual bodyguards at the entrance so that the rebel humans can't get back in and ruin everything.
But the biblical story is about how God wants us back in his presence.
Yes, exactly. So this is why he chose the people of Israel and gave them the gift of a symbolic miniature Eden called the tabernacle, and then later the Jerusalem temple. In both of these spaces, cherubim were painted and engraved all over, reminding the priests that they are working in God's presence.
Now, if a priest went into the Holy of Holies, he would see there a golden box called the Ark of the Covenant, and on it were 2 cherubim. What's going on here?
Well, the biblical authors describe the ark as the footstool of God's throne, which the cherubim are carrying. Like we read in Psalm 99, God sits enthroned above the cherubim.
But there was no actual throne above the box.
Right, the Israelites weren't supposed to represent God with any physical image. But when the prophets had visions about this space, they saw Yahweh sitting on his throne.
Okay, so cherubim guard the sacred space, carry God's throne, but why do they look like animal mashups?
Well, they're symbolic representations of all the creatures of the earth, because they all belong to God. This is why in Isaiah's vision, all of the creatures are singing, everything that fills the earth is God's glory.
Like a choir.
Yeah, through the cherubim, all creation offers praise to its maker.
Great, that's the cherubim.
And so here's a preview of what we're going to explore. We'll learn more about God's heavenly staff team called the Divine Council. Then we'll talk about angels and cherubim, key figures in the spiritual realm. And then one particular angel called the Angel of the Lord. And finally, we'll see how this whole story leads to Jesus, the one who overcomes evil, reunites heaven and earth, so that a new humanity can partner with God.
We need your help. Ring Them Bells is a non-profit organization where every dollar donated goes right back into the mission of spreading the good news and helping those in need. The main ministry of Ring Them Bells is serving those in need in the name of our King Jesus. Over the past year, we have fed over 2,000 meals, and next year, we want to double that. We can't do this without your support. Everything we create here and all of the food that we serve is free because it's paid for by generous viewers just like you. If you feel led to donate and join the mission with us here at Ring Them Bells, click the Give Butter link in the notes and comments of this video. If you can't support us financially, please continue to like and share the content, as this helps us so much with spreading the good news about what Jesus has done for our world.